Hello and welcome to a series on chromatic harmony I'm calling chromatic transformations. These are tools or mechanisms you can use to explore different chromatic chords while still retaining tonal harmonic architecture. This video is part one of a 6-part series, and today I would like to introduce what I am calling level 1 transformations. As a guitar player, one of the things that took me a while to apply was voice leading to my chordal playing. As guitar players tend to learn shapes for chords and then move those shapes around the guitar neck. But one of my teachers, the late Ted Green, taught me that it can be very useful to think of harmony as voices from a choir instead of just chord shapes moving around. This led me to consider where each voice was moving as the harmony changed. And this radically altered the way that I hear music and how I approach harmony. So voice leading is the way in which individual voices move from chord to chord. Take, for instance, the progression C to G. In root position, moving in this way, if we thought of it in terms of voices, the C goes to G, the singer who's singing E goes to B, the singer who's singing G sings D. And it would sound like this. And if we break that down to what each individual voice is doing, each is singing up a fifth. Now, I don't want to suggest that this is wrong. There's far too many rules that people tend to start to apply when they start to learn music theory or they start talking about harmony. But what I want to talk about is perhaps ways in which we could explore different colors that are musical. So one way that we might move from C to G, for example, if we're talking about voices, is to have each voice make less motion. So in this case, the singer singing G would continue singing G. This is what we call a common tone. E, the singer singing E would go down and sing D and move from C to B. And it would sound like this. Now, what I want to talk about is a specific kind of voice leading that's going to help us understand what I call level 1 transformations. And that's called parsimonious voice leading, which is voice leading in which a single voice moves, and it moves by just 1 or 2 semitones. So in this case, we could start on C, and then we could move the E down to E flat. We could start with a C major chord, and the singer singing G could move up to A, and this would go from the chord of C major to A minor. In the previous example, it's C to C minor. So the first 2 chords, C to C minor, the second 2 chords, C to A minor. In this third set, the singer singing C could move down to B, and this would be a movement of C to E minor. Now, this is referred to as Neo-Romanian theory, and that's a little bit more than what we want to get into today. However, if you are interested in what we're doing in this video, I urge you to go look at the video for 12-tone that talks about Neo-Romanian theory, which is very informative. So if we take a C major scale, what I'm interested in is not just moving triads, which is what they focus on in Neo-Romanian theory, but I want to actually look at voice leading through scales. So if we take a C major scale, let's copy this down, and what we can do is we can alter one of these chord tones, one of these scale tones, and actually get a smooth voice leading or a parsimonious voice leading. So let's raise the F. We can raise that F to F sharp, and this new scale would actually be G major. If we start on C, this is actually called C Lydian, but we're going to shelve that for right now. So we can move from C to G major through voice leading. We could also, again, copy this down, and we could raise the 5th tone G to G sharp. This would give us the A harmonic minor scale. We can lower the 6th tone, A, to A flat, and this would give us C harmonic major. We could lower the 7th tone, B, to B flat, and this would give us F major. or again, from a modal perspective, it would be called C mixolydian, but again, we're just going to call this F major for the sake of this video. Now we could lower also the third tone, E, to E flat, and this would give us C melodic minor. Now we could continue looking at this, however, this is the extent of level 1 transformations, because you might ask, well, why can't we lower the D or change the D? What starts to happen when we change these other chord or scale tones is we actually run into a problem with respect to the tonal harmonic architecture that we want to maintain. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that we lower this D to D flat. Well, we're not going to want to do that because that's going to give us what's called a tonal cluster. So this has these two half steps in a row, and this is less tonal. Again, it's not wrong, but for our purposes, we want to maintain some of that flavor of tonal harmony, but also start to explore these chromatic colors. Now, really, this stretches far back, and we can see the work, for example, of Schubert and Chopin and Wagner and Scriabin that are doing this work in the 19th century and early 20th century that are just extending this tonal language before we start to get into full-blown atonality and serial music. So let's go back to this C major scale. However, now we're going to look at chords that are built from the scale. So if we take the C major scale, these are the triads that are built on the C major scale. Now, if you're curious as to how this happens, there are a lot of resources that you can go and look at, and we'll tell you exactly how to do this. For our sake, we're going to assume that you know how to build triads from a major scale. And so we have C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and B diminished. Now, if we look at our previous scales that we have transformed from C, so say, for example, G major, we can build those same triads, except now we have C major, D major, E minor, F sharp diminished, G major, A minor, and B minor. Now, when we compare this to the triads that we have in C major, we'll notice that there are some chords that are the same and some chords that are different. For example, C major exists both in C major and G major. But in G major, we have a D major chord instead of a D minor chord. Now, E minor exists in both C major and G major, but in G major, we have an F sharp diminished chord instead of an F major chord. G major exists in both C and G major. A minor exists in both keys, but in G major, we have a B minor chord instead of a B diminished chord. Now, if we go back and we add up all of these chords or triads that are built from each of these scales as you move one scale tone in C major, we start to see that we have the chords for C major, the chords for G major, the chords for A harmonic minor, the chords for C harmonic major, the chords for F major, and the chords for C melodic minor. Now, this next step actually borrows from a number of different sources, primarily the work of Dmitri Tymoshko in the book Geometry of Music and a lot of his published papers that he has, and also the work of Kenneth Smith in Desire and Chromatic Harmony, as well as the work of Richard Cohn and Fred Lerdahl and a lot of others. But what this does is it creates a structure. And this has all 12 chromatic pitches of the chromatic scale, but it is structured in such a way that we can look at this as chordal movements. So the idea is to have tension and resolution, or a kind of dissolving of tension or release of tension as we go. And this, of course, again, is something that has been modeled going back to the work of Schubert, Chopin, Wagner, and others. So, for example, when we look at this, we can see that C could go to F. So this is the 1 going to the 4 chord. Now, this is also could be seen as a 5-1 transition, 5 to 1, C to F major. And we could also see that this could be a 5 to 1 from F to B flat. But we can also see in this structure that F can move to G, and this could be a 1-4-5 in C major. The C major chord going to the F major chord going to the G major chord. We could also look at this as the tonic, the subdominant, and the dominant in this way, the 1, 4, and 5. However, it's even more useful if we look at these as tonic categories, the subdominant category, and the dominant category. So each one of these other tones, these other chords, can substitute in for the tonic. So each one of A flat, B, D can substitute in for F. E major, D flat, B flat can substitute in for G. By the way, we also see that we can look at this in terms of D going to G going to C, and that root movement is a basic 2-5-1. So this has that tonal architecture of those very foundational harmonic progressions, but also it gives us a way that we can start to kind of manipulate and play with these different sounds. So let's go back to all of the triads that we had from our scales. And here's the list of all of our chords. And let's drop all of the chords that are repetitious. So let's drop the C's. Let's drop D minor, E minor, F, G, A minor, and B diminished. And what we're left with is all of these other choices that we can make. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take these choices, we're going to categorize them and kind of put them into this tonic, subdominant, dominant categories, and then kind of play around with them a bit and see what happens. So again, we have these tonic, subdominant, dominant categories. And now if we start to superimpose or categorize some of these chords that we have from these level 1 transformations, that is just taking the major scale and moving one scale tone, we start to have our contributions from C major and all of our contributions from these other scales start to show up, where we can substitute them in for the tonic, the subdominant, and the dominant, right? So now let's take our basic 1-4-5 progression, right? This is C, F, G to C, and sounds like this. Okay, now, so those are going to be each of our categories. So we're going from the tonic to the subdominant to the dominant to the tonic again. And what we're going to do is we're going to start to take these substituted chords and kind of put them in for one of those chords. So it turns out that we have 13 different level 1 transformations that are primary. That is staying with each of those individual scale transformations. So we have C augmented going to F to E major to C. We could also substitute in G sharp diminished. We could also substitute in for the tonic F sharp diminished, sounding like this. And we could add a B minor where that D major is. Or we could go back and now we could substitute for that subdominant a D diminished chord. Or perhaps substituting F minor for that subdominant chord. Or an A flat augmented. Or instead of that dominant, we could substitute an E diminished. or a G minor chord, or a B flat major triad. For the one chord, we might actually substitute a minor chord, or an E flat augmented, or an A diminished triad. So here we have these transformations of the tonic, the subdominant, and the dominant. Now, if we look at all of these various chords, it turns out that there are, and now instead of just doing these primary transitions, we can actually combine any of these chords. So if we want a tonic, pull from any one of these chords from the tonic category. If we want a subdominant, pull any of these chords, and we can combine them in interesting ways to start exploring these different progressions. And just from these level 1 transformations, there are 384 possible combinations. Now, there are 6 levels. This is just level 1. So now we start to see where these can go and how we can kind of explore these different colors and add these in. So that is the ending of part 1. Part 2 is coming soon. Please, if you found this useful, like the video and leave a comment below. Thank you so much for listening.